Welcome to episode 34 of After the Breach podcast. We are your hosts, Jeff and Sara. Ahoy, Sara.
Hey, Jeff.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to be home.
It's good to have you back, at least for now, and then you're going to be...
Just for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and you're heading to Australia. We have a great episode today. We have a special guest, Captain Jim Maya.
Yeah, this episode's been a long time coming. We've been talking about having Jim on since, I think, the very beginning.
Absolutely. He is an incredible whale watch captain, naturalist, teacher, storyteller, and the ultimate connector. He really is. He is responsible for connecting so many people with whales, and he has connected. You and I met on one of his trips in 2013 when we were both whale watch passengers.
Yep.
And Spencer and Rachel, who are my business partners and married, met on through Captain Jim.
Yep.
And many of us at Maya's Legacy Whale Watching started our whale watching journey as passengers with Captain Jim. And everything about Captain Jim, his style, his values, what's important, the importance of people and connecting people to whales and information and history and
this place.
And this place, I was going to say, in the scenery and this place, the little things, is deeply woven through the entire core of Maya's Legacy Whale Watching. Yeah. And it's very overdue to have him on the podcast. So for those of you that know Jim and have been out with Jim or know him from social media or have met Jim, this will be a great podcast for you. And for those who've never met Jim, this is really where Maya's Legacy Whale Watching started. And it starts with the legend and legacy of Captain Jim. So Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I have been looking forward to this day for such a long time.
We've been looking forward to having you.
Yeah, we're long overdue. Jim has kind of, as we mentioned in our intro, Jim has been an incredibly influential person on me and on Sara and many of us at Maya's Legacy Whale Watching.
I think, to be fair, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that if it weren't for Jim, we wouldn't be sitting here today.
Absolutely. I wouldn't. You wouldn't. Sara, you and I actually met on a trip
with Jim.
We had a mutual friend that I was up here for the week. And I had a friend text me and said, hey, my friend Sara is going to be on the trip that you're going out with Captain Jim.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not the only ones who met through you. Spencer and Rachel, my fellow co-owners at Maya's Legacy Whale Watching.
I introduced them.
Yeah, they met.
This is Captain Jim, by the way, talking. It's very difficult because I'm sitting here blushing. And so...
Well, no one can see that. But Jim, let's get,
I can see it.
Let's get into and others who work at Maya's Legacy. April also got connected with Maya's Legacy because of her very first trip out with Captain Jim.
I had my first trip out with Captain Jim back in the 90s. Probably like your first year running tours.
So when did you start running tours out here, Jim?
We got our captain's license, and I'm talking about my wife and myself because she was a big influence. Got the captain's license in 1996 and ran a few trips in 96, but mostly it started in 1997.
And I think that's the year that I was out with you.
Yeah, in the little yellow boat called Annie Mae.
Yep.
It was a little double-ended bartender, our first whale watch boat. And yeah, I loved that boat, but it quit breaking. It kept on breaking, so we quit running it and got a better boat. And then we got a better boat, and now you guys have got the best boats in the whole whale watch fleet.
And you came up here. You were not living here prior to that. You were in California, correct?
And the garlic capital of the world.
The garlic capital of the world.
We were teaching in Gilroy, California, where we had taught for 20 years, my wife and myself, Carol Lee. And in 1986, we were introduced to the Northwest because of Expo 86, and everywhere we went, we saw green, and we met wonderful people and ate wonderful food and saw the most amazing body of water in the world, which is the Salish Sea. And I thought I knew geography because I was a teacher, but I had no idea how much water there was up here and how beautiful it is, and the fjords and the islands and the fog hanging up in the trees and the seals and the salmon and the whales. We kept looking for whales, never saw them. They were always here yesterday. And so we kept coming back and kept coming back. And finally, I said to my wife in 89, let's buy a lot. And we bought a lot. And in 1990, we built a house. And we finally moved up here in 94. And we're teaching in Renton during the week. And then we came up to the island on the weekends.
And what were you teaching?
I was mostly a high school drama teacher, but I was teaching history and drama at a middle school in Renton.
Nice.
Yeah, it was great. It was great.
And your teaching never stops.
It doesn't.
It's okay. No sense being modest, because I never have been in my life anyway. So I took to whale watching and included a lot of teaching along with looking for whales, not only about the marine natural environment, but also about the history of San Juan Island and the history of this area, the lighthouses, the authors, the early expeditions. I always joke about teaching the anthropology and the ornithology and the sociology and all the ologies of the islands.
And I think that's like really the foundation of where we are and who we are and how we operate now, really is what you created and started.
I think so. And so I sell my photographs now, and I meet a lot of people that have gone out in Maya's legacy or are going out in Maya's legacy. And this happened this last weekend. And everybody that I've ever talked to says it's been wonderful. And once in a rare while, they didn't see whales, but they had such a great time because they saw so many wonderful things, and they learned so much. That's the common refrain. I learned so much, and it was so much fun.
It's wonderful to hear, and there's no doubt that your influence is deeply ingrained in everything that we do, and that we continue on.
Yeah, it's why you had such a loyal following, us being some of those loyal followers, and still to this day, and why it's carried over into how we operate now.
It's really heartfelt to hear you folks say this because I know it to be true, but when you hear it from somebody else, it's always really sweet.
So I'm really curious, Jem, coming up here and I mean, your experience of seeing the Pacific Northwest and the Salish Sea. A lot of people have that experience when they come up here. They don't realize how much water is up here, what is exactly up here, and it's a deeply moving and fascinating experience and very fulfilling once you're up here and you're seeing everything in the whales and the wildlife. But prior to that, like what was your experience with whales prior to coming up here? I'm just curious, like when's the first time you saw whales?
The first time I saw whales were humpbacks in Hawaii. And I did have an experience with SeaWorld, which was very troubling, but at the same time, I had a chance to be intimate with a situation where I got to know one of the animal doctors, the veterinarians at SeaWorld, and he invited me down, and my wife and my grandson came down to visit, and they had just inseminated the first female orca at SeaWorld, and he said, "Come on with me. We're going to do a check on her to see whether she's pregnant or not." And so they did a scan in the water. This beautiful, amazing animal came over and rolled over right next to me, and the doctor waded on in and did a scan and found out that she was pregnant, and I was in awe. And I know how people feel about SeaWorld, and I feel the same exact way. And yet, for many people, their first introduction to this amazing, maybe the most amazing animal in the world, was at SeaWorld, and that was the first time. And then we were searching for whales, and we moved up here, and for the first 3 years, friends and family came to visit, and I took them out to see whales. I'd go up on top of one of the hills and watch where the boats from Victoria were going. and I could see them way in the distance. And if they were headed north, I would go down and get my family and get in the boat and head north. And they got so much enjoyment out of it. My friend Dennis Aquilina was out with his family one day, and he's from New York. And so he talks with a New York accent. And, he said, Jim, I don't know what you got to do, but you got to do this, man. What do? You need a captain's license? Find out how to get a captain's license. Go get it and start a company, man. This is excellent. You're going to make money, and you're going to pay for a boat, and you're going to pay for your mortgage, and man, you got to do this. So I did.
Amazing.
And we're glad you did.
We are glad you did.
I am glad I did too. It's been truly one of the great pleasures of my life, and it has been a wondrous journey. I don't know why I have been so fortunate to be able to have been a teacher for 35 years, which I loved, and to have been whale watch captain since 1997, 96. And so I've had this amazing life. And I turn 85 next month, so it's going to continue. And I hope to go on for a long time.
We hope you do too.
We do too. Yeah, absolutely. When you made this change and you moved up here and then you opened up the whale watching company, was there any trepidation or were you anxious at all about what am I doing? Like, how am I going to make this work?
When we moved up here, a lot of people in California said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And so, yes, when we moved to this forsaken place where it rains 360 days a year, according to my friends in California, they wondered what on earth I was doing. I bought land on an island in the Northwest where it rains all the time. What are you doing, Jim? You got a good job here. And the call of the Salish Sea was overwhelming. And so I said, sorry, guys, I'm going to go ahead and do this. And there was a lot of trepidation. And the fact that I quit teaching to start a whale watch company, where I left at a modest income, but a regular income, and something that I love to do, to start a whale watch company was, it was a little scary, but people started to come. And I had a little VW Volkswagen convertible. And when I didn't have customers, I would go out to the west side and I would see people with binoculars looking for whales. And I would say to them, "Hey, I know where whales are, and I have a boat, and I'm a captain, and here's my little folder. Would you like to go see whales?" And they said, "Sure." And they'd follow my little VW Volkswagen down to this little snug harbor, and we'd get in our boat, and we'd go look at whales. And I started talking to the lodging companies, bed and breakfasts and so on the island. And I would go and pick up people, and my wife would babysit dogs and babysit babies. And she would go pick up people. And so it got started, and the word spread, thankfully. By the time Jeff and Spencer and Rachel bought the business, it was rated number 1 on TripAdvisor, and it was a nice run. It was very gratifying.
It's amazing, and I completely identify and understand that trepidation, and I think you do too, Sara, because we both made a jump from something that, again, was nothing crazy, modest income, but regular income, to make whales a part of daily life, and it was not necessarily a lot of people giving feedback of, what are you doing? But best moves I think we've all made, and I think you're an inspiration for that, Jim. And I know one of your big things that you tell people, and you really helped me make that jump, is do it now.
The train only comes by once in a while, and if you don't jump on it, and it's going to go toot toot and leave the station, and you'll be standing there wishing that you had got on that train. And I know that both of you did that. If you folks out there ever meet Jeff and Sara, ask them their little stories about what they left and how difficult that was. And I have my own funny little stories about them doing that. And if you ever meet me, you can ask me. I don't know that we want to put it out on the podcast, but they know, Jeff and Sara know what I'm talking about.
Well, I distinctly remember my first phone call to you when I was thinking, when I got clear that what I really loved doing was being out on the water and sharing whales with people. And it took me a while to call you, was asking you if you would mentor me so that one day I could do this. And I was afraid to call you and ask you because my fear was that you were going to say, oh, you don't want to do this. And then I didn't know where my ultimate plan was going to go. But I remember calling you and telling you about this realization and asking you if maybe in like 10 or 15 years, I could learn enough to be able to do this. And do you remember what your reply was?
I don't remember exactly what my reply was.
Your reply was, what's wrong with right now?
That's one of my phrases. That's one of my phrases. And you have to go for it. You have to, in your life, take risks. If you don't take risks, you don't learn anything. You don't progress. You get stuck in the same spot. And sometimes those risks are going to be failures, but you learn from those failures. The analogy I always use is a little kid trying to tie his shoes. It takes him 40 or 50 or 100 times to learn how to tie his shoes. He keeps on trying, and finally he learns. And adults are afraid of failure. They're terrified that they might fail. It's public speaking. They will not get up and say anything in public because they might fail. They might be embarrassed. And Jeff, all the credit in the world to you and to you, Sara, for taking those risks. And they were risks, and you took them, and look where you are now. Captains and owners of the preeminent whale watching company in the Northwest.
Well, I think it's really important to acknowledge that what your response was. What's the problem with right now? Because there are so many people tangentially in the whale world and in this industry, and I've talked about this a lot and quite recently too, that are just like, you'll never work with orcas or you'll never, blah, blah, blah. And I just feel like it's such a disservice to who we are, not just our youth, because, people in their adult years and any point in their lives can make changes. And so really hats off to you for having that response, because so many people would just be like, you're not going to work with orcas. You're not going to start a whale watching business. So many people do that, and it's just oversaturated. Find a different dream. So kudos to you, Jim. I mean, really, I think that's the response that sometimes is needed to push people out of their comfort zone and to take that risk.
I think so. Fundamental to learning, fundamental to progress is taking a risk. And you guys did, and look what it's rewarded you. And it's a great lesson in life.
Absolutely, because when that train comes by, it's not an easy boarding. You have to jump on the train, and it's not always easy. It usually is not. Right. It usually is not an easy thing, and you do have to take it. It requires a leap of faith, and you have to do that. I think we've all done that. I think everybody that works with us has done that, and I think that a lot of the influence started with you, Jim, and has gone down through the company. And so by you getting on that train, you've inspired other people to get on that train who are inspiring other people. And it's an amazing legacy that will continue on to other people getting.
Some might say it's Maya's legacy.
Ooh.
That is the best name for a company, a whale watch company, that I could possibly imagine. So we continue on. And I don't get out on the water as much as I used to. I have my own little boat it's about 16 feet, and I keep it tied up, and I go fishing, and I go crabbing, and I go whale watching, and I go sightseeing in my little boat. And then often I go out as a naturalist with Maya's Legacy, and it continues to be a joy.
Things have changed quite a bit in your time here that you've seen.
Oh, yes.
Talk a bit about your early days, your first 10 years of whale watching, and what what you would see in contrast to what it's like today, and not just what you would see, but how things worked on the water with different companies out there?
It was kind of the Wild West, and it was very easy to start a whale watch company in terms of you needed a boat and you needed to spread the word and you needed to get a website and hopefully people would come. Out on the water, very, very different. There are new regulations that have been passed. Some of those regulations are very controversial because I believe that in imposing regulations on the whale watch boats, the powers that be have spent millions and millions of dollars in vain efforts to look like they're doing something instead of going to the fundamental causes of the decline of our resident whales. Speaking of resident whales, my first harbor that I left from was Snug Harbor on the west side of San Juan Island, and it was a wonderful spot because it is historically one of the best places in the world to fish for salmon. And of course, that's what our resident orcas, J, K, and L pod, our resident orcas of the San Juan Islands, and they are salmon eaters. And many a time I was able to go out into my boat, and in 2 or 3 minutes we were seeing orcas. And oftentimes we would go out and we would just sit there and watch them feed and watch them play, and we seldom had to travel very far. And they were on a regular pattern, and if you wanted to see from land, you could go out to Limekiln Park and sit there during the summer, and if you had a week or so and you sat there every day, you would see them 4 or 5 days, perhaps, on a pretty regular basis. And they oftentimes swam and congregated together, all 3 pods. And so it was not uncommon to see 50 or 60 or 70 orcas, sometimes even more, on a single trip. I remember going straight out from Snug Harbor and watching the superpod. This was an event that happened on a regular basis in the springtime. Whale watch captains would sometimes make side bets when we would see the first superpod. And I remember being out there and for hours watching all J, K, and L pod, which is the superpod. When they're all together, it's a superpod, not just when a few members of each of the pod are together. So when all the members of J, K, and L pod were together, and they would feed, and they would mate, and they would play, and they would jump, and they would roll, and all you had to do was just park the boat, turn off the engine, and sit there. Sometimes they would come right underneath the boat. We would drop the hydrophone and listen to them talk, listen to their vocalizations, and those days have gone. And for a variety of reasons that are very complex, today, very frequently we see transient orcas, or the mammal-eating orcas, or the Biggs orcas. And in my early days, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, we never saw, or we very seldom saw, transient or mammal-eating or Biggs killer whales. We always saw the residents. And when the residents were not close by, we just took people to look for seals. We never looked for the transient orcas because they weren't there. So that's been a huge change. We see them very frequently now, and that's because of the great abundance of their primary prey, which are harbor seals. The San Juan Islands and the Salish Sea being one of the places in the world where there's a huge number of harbor seals. So today we see transients or the Biggs whales more often, and we don't see the residents except once in a while from land and once in a while accidentally on the water. Or if we do see them, it's at a great distance, and we watch for a few minutes and then we leave.
Lots of interesting questions, follow-up questions on what you just said. And Sara, I know you were here during those days, and you saw some of those years. I caught a couple, like I was at the very, very end of that era. But one of the most fascinating things that you didn't even mention in the early days are humpbacks.
I was amazed when we go out today and we see humpbacks, and when we estimate that maybe there might be 300, 400, 500 humpbacks in the Salish Sea at any one time, from the Pacific Ocean up to the northern stretches of the Strait of Georgia and down into Puget Sound. I remember one time seeing a humpback, and, I was overwhelmed by seeing that humpback because I had never seen one before, and then I never saw one for the rest of the season. And now they are a regular feature, a regular habitant of the Salish Sea. So that's a huge change.
Huge change. I mean, we can see them almost any day.
Yes.
From late spring into very late fall, early winter.
Yeah.
They are all numbered, and you have names for every one of them. And that's amazing.
And it's amazing change that's happened just in my 10 years here. I remember my first season or so, we would see them, but it was a big deal when we saw them because we didn't see them a lot. And now it really could be an almost everyday occurrence.
Yeah.
Yes. I took a photograph of Big Mama in 1997 or 1998. And it's I call it my first picture because I enlarged that picture. That's a picture of Big Mama breaching with the spray and the Olympic Mountains in the background. It was out near between Old Victoria and Race Rocks. And I took that picture and I said, wow, and I enlarged it. And I said, oh, I want to do more of this. And so I started getting better equipment and so on. So that was an influential moment in my artistic life.
And we'll post a link to your website where you sell your images.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
The other interesting follow-up that I have, and would love to get Sara to weigh in on this also, is, and we could go down a rabbit hole on this and do a whole episode, but it is amazing to me, and you mentioned this too, that we've passed so many regulations that are passed with the idea that we're going to help southern resident killer whales with these regulations. And if you follow the regulation timeline, and as regulations got more and more and more stringent, they have spent less and less and less time in the Salish Sea, and their population has declined along that same timeline. And I'm not saying that is a cause because of those more stringent regulations, because correlation is not necessarily causation. However, none of these regulations and none of the government actions for millions and millions, and I don't know if it's tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, nothing has really gone to the core issue of habitat restoration for salmon spawning.
It seems that way, doesn't it? How ironic. My wife would say that the residents do not travel their normal patterns or their patterns that we were used to because the boats are not there for them to look at. And they have felt abandoned and unwanted, and so now they're traveling to other places hoping to find a bunch of boats and a bunch of people that would come out and say hi and laugh and cheer and giggle and cry. The first time my wife and I saw orcas from the water was in 1990, and we got down in our little boat. We were building our house, and my wife was sobbing. She could not even hold a camera. She was so excited and so thrilled. And I know both Jeff and Sara can tell you the great number of times that they have seen people cry when they see orcas for the first time.
Absolutely.
So I don't know that they're really not coming because the boats are not following them, but it's a nice little story.
Well, there's so many things too that point to this correlation to prey availability. So, there's, you were saying, oh, I'll get your take on this, Sara, and I could just feel myself stepping up onto my soapbox, and I could go down the rabbit hole, like you said. So I'm not going to, because that would just become a very long rant.
And this podcast is really just focused on me.
Yeah, and it would take away from Jim.
Yes,
so
come on.
Yeah, it's.
But I do want to throw a number out at you, Jim, because I think this will be shocking for you based on where you came from and how things were when you first started. But this season, and we were tracking our whale sightings on every tour. This season, we have seen on tours southern resident killer whales on 0.02% of our tours. And we have seen Big's killer whales on 87% of our tours.
Wow.
And then if you add humpbacks in, we've seen between humpbacks and Big's killer whales, we have seen whales on 96% of our tours, which I also think compared to the early days of whale watching here, I think we're seeing whales much more often than back when in the heyday of the southern residents, because we have more species here of whales. And I think the whale watching community has gotten better at locating different groups
and you have to look
different
for 'em.
species. You have to look for
They're
them.
not
But I
on
think
the west side.
we've gotten very good at finding different groups of Big's killer whales throughout the Salish Sea and different areas where there are humpbacks feeding.
It really is amazing. I remember maybe 2001 or 2002, some year that for 3 weeks we did not see a killer whale. In July, I remember this little redheaded 8-year-old girl coming out with her whale doll and getting into the boat saying, "Oh, Captain Jim, I'm so excited. I've dreamed my whole life, all 8 years, that we would see, or that I would see orcas someday." And then we went out and we looked and looked and looked and looked and looked. And finally we came on in and she was crying into her little orca doll. And finally she ripped it up and threw it overboard. And looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Oh, Captain Jim, we're not going to see orcas, are we?" And I had to break the news to her. And she didn't tear up her doll.
But it makes a good story.
It makes a great story. And never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So that is really true. And seeing as many humpbacks as we see now, and you toss in minke whales. Interesting thing, we don't see the Dall's porpoise, which are amazing animals to see. They have seemed to decline with the advent of the greater population of Big's whales, and I don't know if that's a correlation or not. That's true.
Yeah. Also, the harbor porpoise numbers have gone up, I feel like, and I don't know if there is a correlation between that either. But yeah, definitely we don't see the Dall's porpoise nearly as much as we used to.
They used to be able to see them pretty much at will.
We saw them every day. I would guarantee it. People called on the phone and said, "What if we don't see orcas?" I said, "Well, you will see Dall's porpoise for sure. Fantastic black and white mammals, and that are one of the fastest, if not the fastest, cetacean in the world."
I remember being out with you many times where we would, go up to this giant tanker where the Dall's porpoise were riding the bow, and you would take your boat up and steal them away from the...
Oh, they loved riding the bow of Peregrine.
Yes, they did. Catamaran bows have something special about them. I don't know what it was, but many a time I remember seeing people out on the boat hanging onto the railings with their heads hanging over the bow or hanging over the sides so that they could see these Dall's porpoise come up and spray them. And that was a great moments taking people out and doing that. And we could see them literally every day for years.
That's amazing. I think I've seen them twice this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've had any play this year.
No. But even when they're not playing, they're cool to see.
Yeah.
They're especially when they're foraging and they're chasing after fish.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Very true. I did want to ask one more follow-up question because, Jim, you do go out fishing. And this is one of my thoughts on Southern Resident, where it's not just prey availability, but it comes down to the size of the fish. Have you noticed differences in the size of salmon since you started coming out here fishing and then today?
Yes, I have. Way back in the day, people were occasionally getting 50-pound salmon, and I haven't seen anybody with a 50-pound salmon in years. The salmon that I caught, a couple of coho salmon this last year, and the cohos were maybe 6 or 7 pounds.
Wow.
And so it only makes sense if you understand that an orca, this huge mammal that is bringing up calories at an incredible rate, it makes no sense for them, and Mother Nature has instilled this in them to go after small salmon because they lose more calories in the effort to catch that salmon than they are rewarded with the calories that they consume. So, yeah, the salmon populations have drastically fallen, as well as the size of the salmon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, a lot of people, when they think of the salmon declines, just think of like the quantity of salmon has declined, but we don't talk a lot about how the quality of those fish have declined as well as the stocks have declined. And I just got done teaching co-teaching a class on the southern residents with the Orca Behavior Institute with Monica and Amanda. And Amanda gave this great presentation about salmon on our last class, and she talked about quantity versus quality, and how, back in the late 1800s and even the early 1900s, Chinook salmon out here were 100 pounds, 90 to 100 pounds. And nowadays, I think like the Derby winning fish in the last couple of years was 22 pounds. And so, talk a lot about the stocks declining overall, but the whales are not only having to find those fish, but having to find more of them because they're having to catch more to make that caloric quota they need.
This sounds like it could be a wonderful idea for a podcast to talk about the quality versus quantity and what's happened with the salmon of the Salish Sea.
Yeah.
It is the key factor in their survival, and they're increasing their population or having it decrease, sadly, as it has done. So, yeah, that's a great topic for a podcast.
And a very complex one.
Definitely. On the other side of the equation, I remember coming out with you in my first whale watch experiences out here, and you talking about the increasing population of harbor seals and sea lions, which has led to a very sharp increase in the population of the big killer whales and more time here where they have abundant food. That's a huge change that you've seen. I mean, I've seen that in 10 years. Sarah, you've seen that. And in 25 or 30 years, you've seen a huge change in the big killer whales.
In the old days, well, first of all, I like to talk to old people, even older than I am. And for years I've done that and asked them about what it used to be like. And I remember this one fellow who owns a big gravel pit here on the island telling me that they used to get excited when they saw a seal. Mm-hmm. And that it was such a rare event. And he said the reason for that is that they used to pay us to shoot them. And you shot a seal, and if you could snip off its nose, sorry, folks, if you snipped off its nose and you took it into the county seat, they would pay you $5 or $6 or $7 for it. And so many people would take their rifles out and shoot seals. And that stopped with the National Marine Mammal Protection Act. And but seal populations to decline to the point where they were almost non-existent in the Salish Sea. So they stopped shooting them. Their populations increased. But in the meantime, I think that the bigs, mammal-eating orcas, just said to each other, why go there to the Salish Sea? Because there's no food. So, let's not go there. And then finally, I don't know, it was Fred or Sam or somebody swam into the Salish Sea and found all these seals and said, hey, guys, over here. And they gradually started coming, the big whales. And they are fascinating animals, and they're big. And to watch them in a prey event, as sad as it is utterly spectacular.
Cue Circle of Life music.
Yes. So that's a circle of life. Circle of life. It's better than going to Africa and seeing lions chase down gazelles. Or can lions catch gazelles, or do they have to be a cheetah to catch a gazelle?
I couldn't tell you, but I'm assuming they can catch.
That's a little away from our main topic on these podcasts.
Of Jim,
yes.
But they are incredibly fascinating. They're very culturally different from the southern residents, and we're learning more and more, and they are just absolutely fascinating.
Are they the same species, or are they just a different ecotype?
Well, it's kind of changed.
Everybody's
recently.
smiling right now.
Yeah, it's a debate right now.
So there was a proposal last year or earlier this year to break them off as two separate species. So
which they should be.
Any fish-eating killer whale in the North Pacific would have been its own species, and then any mammal-eating killer whale in the North Pacific would have been their own species. The powers that be decided there wasn't enough evidence to split them off, but they are, I believe, or the proposal is, and I'm not sure if it's finalized or not, so, look it up yourselves, but is that they will be subspecies. So
You have to say subspecies.
all killer whales in the world are Orcinus orca, and then our mammal-eating Orcinus orca rectopinus, and then our fish-eating Orcinus orca ater.
This could also be a great...
But they're also ecotypes too.
Yes, this could also be its own podcast.
Yes.
Jim, before we let you go, something that we often ask our guests is to recount, one or two just really memorable experiences with whales. Doesn't have to be here. It doesn't have to be orcas. It could be from anywhere and any type of killer whale or any type of whale.
As long as it's a killer. No, I'm just kidding.
Out near Turn Point, Stewart Island, watching a pod of whales go by. I'm sure it was J-pod. And in the back of my boat, as we were watching them in the stern, we had on board mom, dad, and 3 kids, and 2 children and a babe in arms. And the babe in arms started crying. And 4 female orca came up to the back of our boat, 10 feet, 8 feet off the stern, and laid there and listened to this baby cry. The baby quit crying, and the 4 orcas started to leave. And I said to the mother, "Can you make your baby cry?" And she made her baby cry. The 4 orca stopped, started coming back toward the boat, and raised their heads out of the water and started vocalizing to that child.
Wow.
And the mother was videotaping during this whole time and got it on videotape, except that later on that evening, she called me and she was sobbing and she said, "Captain Jim, the videotape was blank." And so I have no record of this except my memory. And that was maybe the highlight of the moment, the highlight of my career, seeing that interaction between the human species and the orca species. And there was, to me, and I'm not a woo-woo guy. I like to think that I'm more of a science guy, but this was obviously a communication. One other time, on my first boat, which is a wooden boat, I had just 2 people on board, and we were watching K-Pod, and some jays were probably there, but the wife says, "I'm not feeling well," and she falls over on the bottom of the boat, on the floor of the boat, and she's out cold, and I'm frankly freaking. I don't want to be the first whale watch captain to have somebody die on their boat. So I said, "I got to get back to port." And this is before the days of cell phones and everything. So I put my boat in gear and started zooming off. The husband, by the way, is mad at his wife. Said, "Damn it, I told you not to go out on this trip. You've been feeling sick, and I knew something like this was going to happen." And I said, "Be nice to her, okay?" And so we started zooming away. And all of a sudden, there's 6 or 7 killer whales swimming in my bow wake right alongside the boat, porpoising for over a mile, right alongside the boat. This has never happened to me since. I've never had a woman collapse on board again.
That's good.
But it's never happened to me since, and they traveled with me for a while. I had other captains calling me, "Annie Mae, what's going on? How are you getting the... I've never seen that before." And so it's 2 experiences.
That's amazing. Those are both incredible stories.
And there's hundreds more, but we don't have all that time.
No, but people can come out and they can come out whale watching with us and hear some of your amazing stories.
That's a great idea. That's a fabulous idea. That's the best idea to come out of this hour.
The legend and legacy of Captain Jim.
Yeah.
So come on out with us at Maya's Legacy. And Jim, we really appreciate you coming on, and we'll definitely have you back.
Yes,
My
thank you
pleasure.
so much.
My pleasure. I'll come back anytime.
Well, what a great conversation with Jim, and it was just lovely to have him on board, especially after everything that he's done to kind of set us up for where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always fun to talk to him, and his stories, there were stories that he told that I've never heard before.
Yeah.
So his stories just get better and better.
They really do.
And still teaching and always learning from Captain Jim.
Yep. Well, we have some exciting new episodes coming up.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for the hard work and getting those lined up.
Yeah, we got some really good topics coming up. So we'll be coming at you all winter long. Every few weeks, we'll be dropping a new episode. Sarah's off to Bremer Canyon again to see the Bremer Canyon killer whales. And then we'll both be in the Dominican Republic on the Silver Bank with the North Atlantic humpbacks in their breeding and calving area. So we'll be bringing episodes about those two places as well over the winter and into the spring. We'll probably record an episode while we're on the Silver Bank with fresh stories from the days that we spend out with the humpbacks.
I can't wait to hear people's first in-water encounter and their reaction to that. Because I remember for me, it was just life-changing. We've talked about the Silver Bank many times, but I can't wait to see theirs.
I remember yours because I was there and right when that encounter ended, before we even got back in the boat, I gave you a big fist bump because I knew exactly what you were experiencing.
Yeah.
Really just incredible.
Yeah.
So stay with us. We're going to be bringing you lots of great episodes coming up. And we have a few photo workshops planned for next season. And you can join us on those photo workshops or join us on any tour on Maya's Legacy whale watching from beautiful downtown Friday Harbor.
We have a new office.
We have a brand new office that we've
That's exciting.
Recently moved into. And what are the dates of our photo workshops, Sarah?
Yeah, so we have 2 for next season, May 17th and 18th, and then September 20th and 21st. And I've already had people reaching out about them, so definitely shoot us an email if you're interested in getting on the list for either of those. And it's been a lot of fun these last 2 years doing those. So we do catered lunches and just all day on the water, kind of whale focused. It's been amazing.
And I should say these aren't necessarily photo workshops. I mean, they're great for photographers, but it's really just about a podcast all day tour going out on the water with Sarah and I. But it's not necessarily. I mean, if you're a photographer and you want to come out, that's great. And if you're not, this is really about spending the day, 2 days with Sarah and I out on the water.
And we're happy to share photography tips, and all of that jazz. But it's for everybody, so not exclusive, just for photographers. So we would love to host you. I know there's a few people from this last year that are already signed up for next year. But come join us.
And stay tuned. We might have some info coming soon about a 2027 trip to the Silver Bank. So stay tuned on that. And others potentially as well, yes. In the meantime, everybody,
stay safe out there.
Stay safe out there.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of After the Breach podcast. If you've enjoyed it and want to help us out, please share this with your friends, family, and any other whale-loving folks you can think of. We would also love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have topics you're interested in and would like to hear on the show, please send us an email. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can find us on Instagram as @AfterTheBreach and on Facebook as After the Breach Podcast. And if you'd like to go whale watching with us, then come on up to San Juan Island, Washington State. We run tours with Maya's Legacy Whale Watching, departing just steps away from the ferry landing in beautiful downtown Friday Harbor. It's a great destination for a day trip or multiple days and offers some of the best whale and wildlife viewing in the world. We would love to take you out on the water to see the amazing whales we talk about on our podcast. You can book a tour through the company website at www.sjiwhalewatch.com and make sure to mention you're a podcast listener when you book. Thanks again for listening. And remember, stay safe out there.